The fourth issue is the whole open and linked data movement. This is going to be a whole new world for us. Now, recently there have appeared a number of third-party watchdogs, Charity Intelligence, for example, that's made part of this sector a little squeamish. And we haven't had many of those watchdogs in this sector in Canada. But that's only the beginning. So, for example, we're working with a little company out of Montreal, where they can take the T3010 data, the foundation grants. They're now looking at government grants and government contracts. So we can start to layer on and get an overall sense of the funding picture and look at the boards and who's connected to whom. And so while organizations used to think that they can control their information, now you've got a couple computer scientists at aja.ca writing programming, and they can just put it all together. It's going to be transparent, whether you like it or not. And the ability and the opportunity that affords for governments, for funders, and for voluntary organizations to really get out in front and use the open data. And again, I think other countries are far ahead of us. The UK, for example, which has a very explicit policy of open data. You take the Crime Spy app, where you can get an app for your phone that looks almost in real time at crime stats across the city, so you know what's going on where. The ability to link data and to use it is a whole new world, and I think it's not something we should fight. It's something that we should have really take advantage of. And fifth, the succession of leadership in the sector and for the sector. We've long talked about, I'm sure Martin has more to say about this, of the need to bring in youth and minorities into the sector to really look at succession planning. It's been a sector that's often depended on the leadership of a few key individuals. Given the size of the sector, it's sometimes surprising to me how few individuals have really mattered in the sector, and they've been important, but we need to put much more emphasis on leadership training and education. At Carleton, we're creating a new master's program in philanthropy and nonprofit leadership, we hope. It's going through the review process, because we think we need to recognize the credentials in that. So we need to give serious attention to that succession planning. But I think there's another kind of succession going on, which is in this sector, it's tended to look very actively at the federal level for its engagement, probably more than it should have over many years. But that's changing. The action, well, it probably always has been at the provincial level. Now I think it really is in terms of the engagement at the provincial level. So we're seeing many, even the national organizations that focused much more attention at the federal level, trying to figure out how they engage, how they work with partners in engaging provincial governments. So there's a real opportunity there. But that takes structures, it takes true relationship building. So my point is that there are huge opportunities, particularly for provincial and municipal governments. I think this entails several things. For the sector, as I say, I think it entails a kind of strategic initiative that is more than just telling what we are, but really engaging that sector. It means engaging with politicians. It means helping public servants see the alignment, see where there can be mutual cooperation and mutual interest. I think it means investing in some of the infrastructure organizations that can back that process. I think it means stronger leadership for and by the sector, not individual organizations in the sector, but for the sector as a whole. And governments need to do their bit in that. They need to see the mutual alignments, whether it's around communities and neighborhoods, jobs and employment, healthcare. They align with real policy and issues that affect real communities. Supporting social finance and capitalization, enabling the standards initiative to really allow the sector to get out in front of that good governance agenda. It means to stop thinking about this as simply a contract culture and a contract issue. Not to say that contracting isn't important, but to look much more broadly at collaboration in new ways. To make room for open data and let citizen organizations do some of that work, write the apps, compile the data for government. And I think that needs to be driven from the top. It won't happen by individual departments doing that in an individualistic or fragmented way. There's, of course, a role for the media in this as well, which, given where we are, is important, but I won't talk to that. So I think we're looking at engagement and collaboration in a whole variety of new ways of working together. And as Don Cherry might say, it's not rocket surgery. It doesn't take years to plan. It takes a basic discussion, imagination, and then getting on with it. Thank you.
I need the clicker first. Clicker. Thanks for the opportunity to be here, especially with Susan, and we've worked together before over many years of working on the National Voluntary Sector Initiative and a range of other things. I also have a connection with Carleton, just to let you know. Everybody does. I actually was a member of the, I guess it was the Center for Voluntary Sector Research, which has now been amalgamated with another organization for whatever purpose, and I won't get into that. But also, at the same time, Paul and I have a very strong relationship in terms of the last couple of years, and more than a couple of years, of actually talking about the future of the sector and how we're going to move forward. And in a sense, because of Paul's work, we've been able to actually move forward in a way that's unique in Canada, and I'll speak to that in a second. So it's very important for us to talk about the sector from a practitioner's point of view. But I also think understand our context in Manitoba, which is very different than what's happening across Canada. And that's what I want to be able to talk about today. If I can figure out how the clicker works. Which one do you press? That one. Okay, good. So just to give you some context, which I think is really important, you may have heard about the Federation, you may have not. We've been at this for 14 years as an organization, as a group of people who've been trying to figure out exactly what it is about the sector that we want to talk about and how do we bring that issue forward. So 14 years ago, a group of us got together and started talking about how do we move the agenda forward. And in 1998, we came together and started to talk about, is there a way to actually engage the sector around its sustainability? And out of that came the Manitoba Voluntary Sector Initiative, and that happened 3 months before the National Voluntary Sector Initiative took place. We were ahead of the game, which Manitoba seems to have a habit of doing quite often. We went through a process for 3 years of engaging multi-sectorally with levels of government, the private sector, and labor. We talked about what was the future of how we could actually work together to sustain the sector, to actually strengthen communities. Out of that, in 2003, we signed declarations of support between 3 levels of government, the private sector, and labor. And then we went quiet. No one seemed at that point in time engaged and interested in how the sector can actually start to recognize its importance, but also how it could bring the sector together in a way that actually had a conversation that government cared about. It took us 4 years of in and out trying to actually frame the conversation. And in 2008, we started again with a conversation that seemed to generate interest from government about the labor market. That was the frame that seemed to get attention. And it was for the reason that I think, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, because you were part of that process, it was very much around the fact that government was starting to actually become very engaged in what were sector councils and the movement towards labor market information. Although sector councils in Manitoba have been around for 20 years, approximately 20 years.